Okay. So, welcome everyone to this special meeting of the Scrutiny Panel. Welcome to all our guests in the chamber and to everyone watching online. Just a few housekeeping remarks first. Okay, it's not, yeah. This meeting's being recorded and live streamed. Please could everyone keep their microphones on mute throughout the meeting to prevent audio feedback. If you're still getting feedback, please turn off nearby devices. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand to get my attention and state your name and affiliation before making any comments. Anyone who's attending virtually, the chat function must not be used to have conversations with other participants or to provide personal information. Please only use the chat function to alert me that you wish to speak, to raise points of order or to report tech problems. Please also note that the press may be in attendance. This is a formal meeting of Hackney Council. My name's, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Councillor Margaret Gordon. I'm the Chair of Scrutiny Panel. So I will be here deliberating this evening together with my colleagues who are the chairs and vice chairs of Scrutiny who are sitting over here. So just moving on to item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. I've had apologies from members, Councillor Joseph and Councillor Conway. Are there any more apologies for absence? No. And from Cabinet members, Councillor Carol Williams and Councillor Cleon Mackenzie have also put in their apologies. So moving on to agenda item 2, which is urgent items. I haven't been notified of any urgent items. So we're now going to move, the exempt item. Yeah, should I go through that? Yeah, okay. There's an exempt, sorry, just to highlight one particularly important point of this evening's proceedings. There is an exempt appendix for agenda item 6, Appendix C, which will be in everybody's papers. I will ask the Scrutiny Panel at the appropriate time whether additional time will be required to consider and ask questions about this information. Should the Scrutiny Panel wish to discuss the exempt appendix, we'll move to a closed private session where the press and public will need to be excluded. Once the content of the exempt appendix has been discussed, the meeting will be brought back into the public arena. So that we're clear, Scrutiny Panel's decision, final decision, will be taken in public. So moving on to agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Have members got any interest to declare on this occasion? No, thank you. So agenda item 4. So this is our first substantive item of this evening's agenda. So this is the call-in of the executive key decision on CES 283, School Sufficiency and Estate Strategy. So this is, just to introduce this item, this is a special meeting of the Scrutiny Panel to hear the call-in of decision of the executive. A key item of our function in scrutiny is to consider the call-in, is to consider where appropriate call-ins of executive decisions. The call-in was requested on the 18th of December 2023 by Councillor Zoe Garbett, supported by 4 other councillors, Councillor Alistair Billy Nurbeck, Councillor Simchi Steinberger, Councillor Hershey Liza and Councillor Grace Adebayo. Welcome to Councillor Garbett and Councillor Adebayo in the chamber this evening, and Councillor Binny Lovelock who's attending online. So the basis of the call-in is set out on the agenda, pages 21 and 22. And I'll just very briefly go through the grounds so everyone's clear what we're discussing. Decision maker. So the basis of the call-in is firstly that decision maker did not make the decision in accordance with the principles of decision making as set out in the Council's Constitution under Part 4, Section E, 1.2a. In particular, there was no due consultation. There wasn't due consultation, the taking of professional advice, and in relation to clarity of aims and desired outcomes. And further, and additionally that in making its decision, the council failed to consider relevant evidence set out in Part 4, Section E 1.2d, and the decision was not taken in the interest of the borough's residents, and a preferable alternative could be adopted. I think maybe something missing from my brief, because I think you're also relying on consideration and evaluation of alternatives. Yeah, is that correct? Thank you very much. Yes. So yeah, just so that we're clear, those are the grounds. So just really to additionally make it clear at this stage that the lead calling councillor may not seek to introduce any additional explanations, and the presentation needs to be based on the grounds already stated. So just to make sure that everyone's clear about that and that we're focused on those grounds that have been submitted. So I'd like to welcome to the meeting this evening. I've already welcomed Councillor Garbett, Vinnie Lovack, and Adebayo, and I don't think Councillor Steinberger or Councillor Lisser is present this evening. And also invited from Hackney, our monitoring officer, Louise Humphreys, who's sitting on my left, and then Deputy Mayor Antoinette Bramble, Jackie Burke, welcome particularly to Jackie Burke, the Group Director for Children and Education, Paul Senior, the Interim Director for Education Inclusion, David Court, the Interim Assistant Director for the School Estate Strategy, and Lucinda Bell, who's an education legal lawyer. So also in attendance we have Cabinet members, so I'd like to welcome Mayor Caroline Woodley, Councillor Chris Kennedy, Councillor Guy Nicholson, Councillor Rob Chapman, Councillor Metty Coburn, Councillor Susan Fajana Thomas, and Councillor Sade Ete, and Councillor Stem Noema. And also welcome colleagues from Save Colveston Primary School, and I've been informed that Hazel Capper, welcome, Hannah Boyd, she's not here, Helen James, thank you, Hendrik Elston, he's not here, yeah, Karine Luchosi, welcome, Tara Mack, no, she's not here, and I think attending virtually we've got Mike Cooter. So welcome. Thank you very much for giving up your time and your evening to attend this meeting. So I'm now going to invite the lead call-in member, Councillor Zoe Garbett, to unmute her microphone to present the reasons for the decision being called in and to outline suggestions for a preferable alternative decision to scrutiny panel. And you have up to 10 minutes for this presentation. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I wanted to start by acknowledging how difficult this is for everyone involved. We have been in contact with the heads, I know that aren't represented in the room this evening. We understand the impact of this consultation and the decision, and we've welcomed people's reflections on the process all along the way. And I also wanted to set out from the start that I really do appreciate how much work's gone in from council officers to the reports and to supporting staff and families, as well as to governance for pulling together this meeting at short notice and all the papers. I also want to thank the parents who've spent a lot of time going through the papers and the documents, organising actions, supporting each other, and I want to highlight their input into this call-in. So as set out in our constitution, the call-in is a mechanism that should not be used lightly, and councillors here have come together and not taking this decision lightly. We're responding to concerns raised by constituents, and we're representing their views this evening. I'm really glad that the scrutiny councillors get to review this decision, and thank you for those present for being here this evening. You know how much this distress this has caused families of the impacted schools and also those across the borough. So it's really important that we give this proper scrutiny and are transparent so that residents can trust this decision. So I'm going to take you through some key points. I'm not able to cover everything, but I'm going to cover quite a lot in this introduction. And just to be clear from the start, we're not calling in the full decision. We know that the consultation process has impacted the schools in different ways, particularly in terms of roll numbers at some of the schools. So we focused on 2 school decisions. So that's 3.3, the discontinuation of Colveston Primary School from September 24, with the children guaranteed a place at Princess May if they want it, and 3.4, which is to discontinue Baden-Powell from September 24, guaranteeing children a place at Nightingale if they want it. So the majority of the councillors on this call-in represent the boroughs, the wards that those schools are in, and these schools have parents groups that have approached us to represent these decisions that are part of this call-in. And to be crystal clear from the beginning, we're asking Scrutiny to refer these two decisions back to Cabinet to reconsider, noting our points and the alternatives that we're presenting. So as stated in the beginning, we believe that the decision maker has not made a decision in accordance with principles of decision making. So the first one is around consultation. So that's at all stages, the consultation feedback was overwhelmingly negative. However, this never impacted the decision. No information was provided about how the consultation was going to be used and how stakeholders could provide information that might influence that decision. There was limited promotion of the consultation, so we're aware that in the area there's been wide promotion of consultations for other things like SUDs and LTNs, yet there was limited kind of flyering and consideration of limited stakeholders for this. A point often made in response to this is that other areas have made school closures within a 3 months notice, but by comparison, we've drawn out this consultation and this situation, giving false hope for a consultation and ended up with the same decision. So we'd like Scrutiny Panel to look at the lawful points of lawful consultation, which are on page 859 of the full document, and really bring your attention to the points around sufficient reasons for proposals being permitted for consideration, and whether the consultation has been effectively accounted for in the final proposals. So some questions we'd like Scrutiny to consider are things like, have the due consultation been undertaken? What the consultation achieved, and what real power, if any, that residents had through the consultation? The next point is around aims and desired outcomes. So the stated aim that we understand for the proposal was to reduce the surplus vacancies that are listed as 600 as a 21% figure in January 2023. But that's not when you're considering an unofficial cap, that's looking at the formal cap. If schools in scope already have a cap and the data from November vacancies shows that the plan is already down to 439 places. And also an additional point here is in relation to decision 3.3, which is that the plan is 30 for Baden-Powell and 30 for Nightingale. The May report suggests that the amalgamation of these will remove 30 places. However, two single forms being brought together to make a two-form school results in no overall reduction. So this was acknowledged in the September Cabinet report, where the plan for Nightingale is now increased from 30 to 60, so no overall reduction. This is a key point. We raise this later in the call-in, and it also relates to decision 3.2 around Colveston, which has 30 pan, and Princess May that has 60, and the aim is to reduce the pan from 90 to 60 by closing Colveston. However, Princess May has an unofficial cap of a pan of 30, so the closure of Colveston does not actually affect the overall plan in that situation. So we'd really like Scrutiny to question what the aims are and how these decisions are helping that aim, what reduction in pan is actually being achieved, and why do we continue to assess the official pan when parents get an unofficial pan in their in-year transfers. And a couple of other points in this area, we would like the Scrutiny Panel to ask about the cost-benefit analysis. We also want them to really scrutinise what criteria was being used for the schools, because these are quite different depending on which school you're looking at. We've had reasons around historic debt, future prognosis, falling roles, as well as rationalising the school estate. And another question to look at in this area is around the outcome of two school mergers subsequently being revealed as impossible, and how that kind of confused the consultation and gave false hope during the consultation. Another point is around considering alternatives. So as I've said in previous cabinet meetings, a long list of schools was mentioned, but parents weren't, and the community weren't bought in early enough to consider those alternatives to really understand why they'd been dismissed. There's no analysis of alternatives or being considered by a school-by-school basis. And up until December, the 4 closure decisions were being voted on as one decision rather than 4 separate decisions. And during the consultation period, alternative things were suggested, such as using space for send unit or making the efficiency savings that have been identified in Colveston. Yet we were told that options have been exhausted, but these things haven't. So those are further points we'd like the scrutiny group to consider. Under decision maker failing to consider relevant evidence, you've got the PAN point again, which I'm not going to go into again, but the further point here is that we don't believe that the deeds have been fully considered, and we're slightly concerned that there may be covenants on them, so that's a good due diligence point. And then the point coming back to the Dalston plan homes that have been built in the area seem to have no impact in the medium or long term. Looking at the GLA's population yield calculator, we found that 100 primary school age children will be brought in the short to medium term and 150 0 to 4-year-olds. And the council seem to accept the GLA's projections, but not the numbers coming out of the GLA population yield. There's also some specifics to Colston around its own story with its change in school leadership, the improvements required to attract families have been really difficult. Their schools been the halls been out of action. There was fencing and things being worked on when parents would have come to visit the schools. We feel like that would have impacted their chances of attracting families. And lastly, the decision is not in the interest of the borough's residents. So the December Cabinet report concludes that there's sufficient vacancies across the borough to accommodate pupils from the 4 schools. However, it does acknowledge a couple of assumptions. So the statutory walking distance and not providing a range of schools, for example, the importance of a one-form entry. I'd also like to add that we really appreciated the CYP Scrutiny Commission scrutiny and their decision-making approach, and that some of our questions mirror theirs, particularly around the consultation and how many places need to be removed to meet the aims. So specifically to the CYP chair and vice chair, I know not both are here, but are you still concerned? I'd be really interested to know that. So in summary, we'd like scrutiny to consider if due and lawful consultation had been undertaken, an understanding of the aims and if this being achieved through, given the unofficial PAN, how thoroughly alternatives have been considered, and short to medium projections of the Dalston plan. And we're asking scrutiny to refer this back to reconsider. Our alternative would be to retain Culverstone so that the school is able to take in children from other schools and look at these other options that we don't feel have been exhausted, like the efficiencies, time to make improvements, and to continue the transformational relationship with Blossom, and to maintain the historic Grade 2 listed building that's a pivotal part of the Dalston plan and the 21st century school. So we'd like a pause and review of the closure of Baden Powell and Colston, looking at the wider picture and involving parents and staff of the schools that should have come into scope at an earlier stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Garbutt. I'm very grateful for you keeping to time. So I'm now going to invite the 2 parent representatives that I've been notified wish to speak. I think it's Mike Cooter who's online, and Helen James. I don't know which of you wishes to go first, but just to let you know that you've got a total of 10 minutes to speak. So,
Thanks
and I
very
can
much.
let you know when you're coming up to 5 minutes if that's helpful.
Yes, although what we are more up for is actually answering questions rather than making a statement. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you do have the opportunity to make a statement now. I mean, you can also answer questions. So,
Mike, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I thought that we knew that Zoe was going to make an introduction, Councillor Garbutt, and it's a very full introduction, and we know that there's a lot of material. But as she acknowledged, a lot of the research has been done by, at least in part by parent groups. And so there's a lot of technical detail, and we thought our time would be better used, and your time perhaps, if we can be drawn upon and if we can raise our hand to offer clarifications, particularly of technical points, rather than repeating much of the material that we've already submitted and which you've all had to read over this holiday break, which I apologise for.
I mean, thank you. And obviously we've had an opportunity of reading the submissions, but, you are very welcome to highlight any particular concerns or you're confirming that you're happy that Councillor Garbutt has, made a fair summary of the points you particularly want to bring to our consideration.
Yes, in terms of the call-in, but it would be very useful to have the opportunity to interject if we think that an answer has not covered the breadth of the technical data in the report.
Yeah, Just to clarify that obviously we've got limited time this evening and there's going to be a number of questions in different directions, that's going to be at the discretion of myself as chair. So, you know, if you do have particular points, I would, you know, invite you to take the opportunity of making them now. But otherwise, you know, we'll see how we go with the question and answer. But thank you very much for your contributions. So, to invite, I think it's Councillor Bramble as cabinet member. If you unmute her microphone to respond to any points made in the call-in by parents. By the call-in member and parents, if you wish to do so at this point, and you have up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to touch on as many of the points that I can, just to reiterate the thanks for parents and their input, and to the staff at Hackney Education for their dedication and hard work on this piece of work. It is very challenging that we are here, and no elected member or no officer on this council ever came into public service to be in the position to having to make really difficult decisions about schools. In the report that came to Cabinet, it sets out all of the reasons as to why we're here, so keeping in line with not reiterating new information. I'll pick up on the first point around consultation. And, you know, unfortunately, if you have a formal consultation, there is a limited period of time and there is a due process that you have to follow. The period of time of the consultation was longer, and I think you made reference to that. And that was because we made an informed decision to think about how we had a longer time to speak to parents, carers, and the wider community. And I know that parents have raised the issue of that once we had the conversation, that impacted movements within schools and parents making decisions to move schools before the time the decision was made. But I go back to the point that I mentioned before, that it wasn't that the council started speaking about schools and then roll numbers fell. Actually, roll numbers were falling and the council had the conversation about it. Inevitably, you're right, that may cause some displacement and some things may move quicker than had expected. And the reason for that is that we have over 600 empty places in reception. That means that we have a surplus of 21. What the GLA, so the General London Assembly, recommends is a surplus between 5 and 10%. So if we take the highest percentage value of 10% and we are 21, we're just over double the amount of vacancies that we have. It's not accurate to state that the due consultation that was undertaken wasn't legal or lawful, because officers worked alongside our governance and legal team to get consultation, information and guidance throughout the whole of that process. And there's information about the statutory notice in the Cabinet report, and if you go to section 4.20 and 4.23, it talks about the process and the due diligence of that process. One thing that was changed in subsequent reports was the language around amalgamation, and we acknowledge that that could be misleading at some times, so it was using the words now closures, which I think in the statutory term was about discontinue, but we use the word closures. So the decision was made on how sustainable each school was. There's been no criteria has come before me, which was mentioned that different schools were, different decisions were made about different schools at different times. That's not the evidence that I saw. That's not the process that I understood that we took, and that's not the dialogue that I had with officers. The criteria was set out. and as a result of that criteria, all of those schools were brought into scope because of that criteria. Now, for example, if you could use a sliding scale, maybe some schools were 7, maybe some were 3. For example, if you want to talk about the difference of context, but every school was brought into a scope on that set criteria. Chair, can you just let me know how much time I've got? 6, thank you. I normally do time myself and I haven't on this occasion. What I will do is I will go on to the next point because I don't want to take up all the time on one point. In terms about the plan and the cap, what it is that when so before going out to the public, officers are working with schools to think about what legitimately could be resolved to be able to address the falling numbers that were impacted by many things that weren't the school's fault or indeed happened as a consequence or result of anything that the council has done. So one of the things that, one of the strategies that was used to try to offset the falling roll numbers was to cap, which means was to reduce the amount of reception class places there was. So for example, if a school had 2 reception classes, which would take 60 children, that would then be capped to 30. However, because they are informal caps, if at any given time there was a pressing need for that school to go back to a 2-form entry, those arrangements could be made, and that's why the information is taken on the figures in the way that they are, because of that flexibility and been able to move those plans as and when is needed by the information that's given to us from the General London Assembly and the local intel that we have in terms of school numbers and demand places on schools. And we did acknowledge in section 4.3 of the Cabinet report that we're trying to review those vacancies across the boroughs and be able to do that within the powers that we have. We wrote to the government to talk about the challenges that schools were having. So 2 things that I'd highlight from the letter is one of the things that we asked for government to give more money to schools to be able to deal with the impact of falling roll numbers. And while there was, we can say government did listen, they did increase the amount of money. The challenge was the money that they gave still wasn't enough to meet the needs of the schools that are finding the challenges because of the impact of falling roll numbers. The other thing that we did is we asked for more powers to be able to get all schools in scope. So we have the powers to maintain schools in scope. We don't have that power with other schools. Any other school of a different status, i.e. is not maintained, it's because officers, or we've been in negotiations and talk to try to encourage them to be part of that, but that's more informal. We don't have the powers to do that. I will go on to there was about the evaluation and alternative reasons about decisions. I just want to touch on that. So throughout the whole process, I think that I have said, with support of Cabinet and the Mayor and colleagues, that if there is any alternative, and we can find an alternative, that we would ask officers to always explore that. The alternatives that were offered were explored, and officers did get back to anyone presenting those alternatives. Unfortunately, they wasn't viable options, i.e. the suggestions that were made were not going to be able to keep those schools open and be able to be sustainable without any more additional or external funding. So there was. There was a mention about SEN provision for Culverston. I think the challenge around that is that you'd have to close the school for that to be turned into special educational needs provision, and then that doesn't do what parents wanted, which was to keep the school open. So that wasn't a viable option either. And in section 4.337, we talked, there's a mention about the distance between schools. So we looked at the distance between schools, and every school was in the statutory walking distance of their homes when officers mapped that out, which is 2 miles for younger children, and I think it's 3 miles, 3 miles for children that are over 8. And I think and looking at the journey between Culverston and Princess May, the difference increase in journey was 3 minutes in when officers looked and mapped it out. There was a look at the deeds, and Chair, and the council confirmed a search that we went back to the archives and undertaking that, is it 1905 deeds were, but before that deeds were not located. When officers looked at it, I'm conscious of time now, when officers
You've got 1 minute left, if that's helpful.
basically with the deeds, there was nothing within existing information that said that charity groups have priority of other groups, and any information wasn't shared, it would be because it would compromise possible tenders going forward. And the Dalston plan, if I could just touch on that in the last 20 seconds, officers worked with the planning department, and basically, even if all of those homes were filled with children, it doesn't bring enough children into those schools at the right time, at the right age, that the school would need now to be viable. We acknowledge the work of Blossom Federation and the work they've done, but even that fantastic work with a deficit they inherited still didn't turn the school around in the time that it needed for that school to be financially sustainable. I appreciate, Chair, that schools are very loved in their community and they're a big part of the community, and we're making this decision, we made a decision because everything that is loved about those schools is under threat if no decision is made or taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Bramble. We're now moving on to the question and answer session from panel members. So I'm going to use my privilege as chair to start off with a couple of questions, and I will bring in colleagues. I just want to mention at this stage that Councillor Adejare, you arrived a little bit late, so I think you missed Councillor Garbutt's presentation. I've just taken legal advice so that you unfortunately won't be able to take part in the decision, but you're obviously happy to stay and take part in questions. Does that sound okay? It's the way, yeah. Yeah, because obviously it's you weren't here to hear the whole of Councillor Garbutt's presentation. Yeah, yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you can, if all parties are happy and you can read the presentation before we get to the decision-making process, I would be content with that, if that's possible. And if you can confirm that you've done that. So I'm just going to start off with a couple of questions. So these are, or firstly aimed at the Deputy Mayor and officers, but I do know that these are questions where I think that parents and Councillor Garbutt may want to come in. So it's firstly really in relation to the projection of places for Dalston, but for children who potentially go to Culverston School. Can I just really please hear a bit more detail really about how these calculations were made and what data was relied on, because I know that Deputy Mayor Bramble has said that these children will not be reaching school age in a way that makes Culverston School viable. But I just really want to probe that, my understanding of that, a little bit more detail, and also just really to hear what the plan would be for those children's schooling, and how many of those children you calculate to be, and what is the basis of those calculations. So if I can start with the officers, and then maybe I know that parents may want to come in on that. I don't know, it's questions of interest to other colleagues as well. So.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to bring in Natalie Broughton from the planning and property team, who's been working with colleagues who are leading on progressing the work of the Dalston Plan in terms of, as we've shaped the Cabinet reports and scrutiny reports in recent months on this, there's been close collaboration between education and housing, because obviously this has been a key development and a key area as we look at projections and forecasting, with a view to trying to find alternative approaches. Natalie, are you happy to talk about that area of focus regarding the Dalston Plan and what we've discussed in terms of the yield and the rationale why we've reached the judgments why we have?
Thank you, Paul. Yes, that's okay with you, Chair. Can everyone hear me okay?
Thank you very much, Natalie. That would be
great. Thank you. Yeah, so if I could perhaps start with a bit of context on the Dalston Plan, and then move on to a bit more information about the GLA pupil projections. So the Dalston Plan, as many of you will know, was published for consultation back in May 2021, and is currently in the process of being finalised. So its purpose is to guide future development in the Dalston Town Centre. I think it's important to remember that it's a supplementary planning document. So it's supplementary to Hackney's borough-wide local plan, which was adopted in 2020. So what this means is that the Dalston Plan itself does not identify new growth. Instead, it helps deliver growth already planned for in the borough-wide local plan, which is known as LP33, Plans for Growth up to 2033. And the Dalston Plan contains more detailed guidance on how this growth can be delivered. So the Dalston Plan provides guidance on 10 opportunity sites, which will help deliver around 600 new homes. But these homes already form part of the housing target and planned growth set out in Hackney's local plan, and indeed the London plan. So the 600 homes is not additional growth. So I think it's really important just to kind of recognise that initially. We, as a planning service, along with colleagues from education, work with the GLA, both the GLA planners and the GLA demography team. And the GLA have confirmed that they do take into account growth from future development sites in preparing pupil projections. So I can confirm that Hackney's planning service has provided details of planned housing growth as detailed in the Dalston Plan to the GLA for them to factor into the GLA pupil projections. So conclusion that the growth that's set out in the Dalston Plan is growth that's been planned for many years now, and that detail has been provided to the GLA, and they factor that into the GLA pupil projections, which education colleagues have used as part of the evidence for this decision.
So thanks very much, Natalie. Can I just probe a little bit more about the basis that the projection of primary school children has been made in relation to those figures? How are those calculations made? And I mean, if an education colleague could answer the question really about where it's likely that they will be educated, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I think that is one for education colleagues who could probably answer that better than I can. If I can pass that back to Paul.
Sorry, Chair, could you just repeat the question?
I was just asking for a bit more detail about how the calculations were made in relation to projected children of school age? And additionally, what educational options will be available for those children when they reach school age, and what sort of timescales we're looking at in relation to this? What planning is there for their education?
Thank you. I can pick that one up. The projections are not calculated by the local authority or by the education authority. The actual statistical mechanisms by which the forward projections up to 10 years forward are provided to us by the GLA incorporate a number of data sets, including the housing trajectory, and the current numbers we're observing are reported back into the GLA for them to generate that calculation. The local authority doesn't generate expected child yield from ourselves, neither does the planning department. That kind of calculation of the expected number of children that will be requiring a reception place, the first statutory school age, is calculated by the Greater London Authority. I don't have the kind of the technical statistical knowledge or to be able to outline that to the panel. So it's sort of like we provide all the information, and the GLA projections are used, London-wide and England-wide for local authorities and and the government to forward project on not just school places but any number of factors. So that's I'm unable to give the kind of technical calculations around that.
I don't know, Paul, whether you're able to sort of answer the speculative question about whether they'd be educated, and if the parents, Councillor Garbutt, want to come in on this, and then I'll go on to another question. Thank you.
Sorry, what's the question, Chair?
My second question was, if there are children within the Dalston area, an increased number of children, as has been projected, and I think this is accepted, where is it planned that they will be educated?
Chair, I think the narrative, as set out from our colleague in property and planning, was obviously from conversations with the GLA, there'll be limited yield from the return on those developments due to families moving into that area. In the event that over the coming years, the GLA data sets out for the next 8-9 years at least, that we're expected to see a decline not just in Hackney, but across London generally. And over time, obviously, if there is a need to scale up, if you like, our school estate at the end of that period, then we have an opportunity where schools can increase their PAN. For example, we have schools of capacity. We have, at the moment, let's say 22% surplus places in the system in the primary phase, which currently, unfortunately, without intervention, the data tells us is going to be rising to 25%, 28%, and 31% over the next few years. So we have sufficient provision in the existing estate, Chair, to scale up.
Much. I don't know whether the parent group wants to come in at this point, or Councillor Garbutt. Sorry. Yeah.
I'll just make a quick point, Mike, and then I will hand over to Mike, who's very much kind of our expert on this. But I think that's interesting to hear. But I think what I'm hearing is the difference between the kind of Hackney picture, and I think that's what you're trying to get to, Chair, the Hackney versus the kind of Dalston specific yield versus the kind of Hackney projections, and also the issue with what's considered in terms of things that aren't in the plan, haven't gone through planning yet. But I'll let Mike come in with some additional points.
Thanks, Mike. If you want to come in, then we'll move on to another point. Thank you.
I was just going to add that question. I think it's very important about the growth being centralized in that place. If it's not taken into fact of if that's in the GLA data, my understanding is that the GLA don't include figures that have not passed planning proposals that have not passed through planning. And I just asked for confirmation that those projections, which still concentrate an influx of children who will need education in the short to mid-term in Dalston, are included in that overall planning picture because they've not passed through planning.
Thank you, Chair. I think my colleague from Property and Planning earlier set out that in terms of there's no new growth identified as a result of the Dalston plan. Hence, we will be looking at limited new child yield as a result of any developments in that space. And as also set out in the Cabinet reports today, that the families or people who will be moving into that locality are unlikely to be families, are likely to be singletons, are likely to be of a particular criteria that leads to the reasons for limited growth in that space. So we have set out that we do feed into the GLA data that undertakes the, if you like, aggregating across London and also national with regards to then feeding it back to us. This is why this is, as a system, it's seen as transparent, it's fair, it's equitable, and why all London authorities will sign up to this, Chair.
Do any colleagues want to come in on this particular point before we move on to other lines of questioning? Councillor Hayhurst?
Possibly.
Sorry, apologies. Yeah.
Thank you. Possibly, I'm still just trying to get my head around the different issues to do with the PAN. There's the point to do with the cap, which I think I've got, because that's explained at paragraph 4.37 of the Cabinet report. So I understand, if I've got it right, the point about the cap was concern of where the displaced pupils might go because other schools would be capping, but I understand Councillor Bramble to be saying that cap was actually put in place to try and save, keep as many schools open as possible, and so that cap will presumably be dealt with far more flexibly going forward because the need for it wouldn't necessarily exist. So I think I've got the arguments that side. I think on the second point, I think I've got the arguments with respect to the GLA projections, and essentially Hackney saying this is GLA done, and Natalie saying that they take into account the local plans. But I think, Councillor Garbutt, you were saying that another point about the PAN numbers in your opening when you were sort of giving examples about certain kids going off to different schools. Can you just explain what that point is, and then can the officers reply so I can just understand what that other point was? Opening, you were mentioning about how 30 children might go off to that school, 30 children go to school. So how is that point different from the two, the cap point and the GLA projection point? Is there another point to do with the PAN that I haven't quite grasped yet?
Thank you. It really that's really helpful to set out. So I think what the PAN point spoke to, which I don't know if it was covered in Councillor Bramble's description, which would be really good to go back to, is what the aim of the exercise is. If the aim of the exercise is to bring the PAN down, which is 600, but we're already operating at about 400 and something. What are we trying to, what is the aim of the whole exercise? I think that's what we're trying to speak to. And then the point that we were making is around it not reducing between the different schools. So there's two different situations. One is 30, I'm going to have to go back to my numbers. One is the situation for Baden-Powell and Nightingale, which was originally spoken about as an overall reduction of 30, because one has 30 and one has 30. So it was originally spoken about that there was going to be a reduction of 30 of closing Baden-Powell, but obviously you're putting the two together. So it's not a reduction, you end up with the same number, 30 plus 30. Yeah. And then the other point is around Colveston, is that you've got one with 60 and one with 30 being put together, but one's already operating as at a lower level anyway, and might affect what they need in the future in terms of their kind of operation.
But do you dispute the figures at 4.37 of the Cabinet report, which says that those schools, the numbers, the pupils in each of those years is well below 30? So is there a dispute as to the accuracy of that table then? Because clearly that is showing a lot of class sizes well below 30. So is that disputed, that table? And if so, why?
What page number is the table that you're talking about?
96.
So I think this point speaks to the kind of experience of parents and what situation we find ourselves in terms of our numbers and what we're trying to do. So the point set out at the beginning was that we had a surplus number of 600 places, but actually we're talking about the fact that that's not the case in terms of what parents experience when they're trying to move schools, because obviously the schools are offering already at a reduced pan. So that's kind of what that speaks to. I mean, I'm not disputing that these numbers aren't true. I don't know whether.
Sorry, do you want to come in?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the numbers you're looking at on that table, the 445, that's a difference between a PAN number and a total school number. PAN is different to total. No, here,
Okay.
on that one. Is that the one you mean? Sorry, I don't know your name.
It's page 96, but every single class, bar Randall, Kramer in year 6, is below, and some very dramatically below, the 30 children one would normally expect per class. So that's the point, because that table shows that just objectively, you know, those schools are, in those years, are dramatically below the 30 pupils per class one would normally expect.
Mike wants to come in on this point, and then I'll go back to the officers, if that's okay.
Yeah, just briefly, this table is included in the report as evidence of how damaging the consultation has been to student numbers. Certainly numbers in the schools that are selected for the proposals did have vacant places, but this is figures as of November 2023 and show the damage and the pupil movement that's been caused by the consultation itself.
Can I just, sorry, I'll let you in a minute, Councillor Hayhurst, but can I just ask the officers what the total impact of these school closures is going to be on the school, well, total school places in terms of the PAN across the borough? What's that's projected to be?
If all 4 proposals that are currently going forward or being considered in the report, it will mean the removal of 105 places from the total number of places that Hackney schools can accommodate in reception. So it will take 105 places out of the surplus of 600. It will reduce the surplus by 600 by, it will reduce the surplus by 105 places. Is the net effect of the proposals.
Still a surplus of 495, and that's obviously including the increase for Nightingale to accommodate the potential increase for Nightingale to accommodate Baden-Powell. Is that right?
That's correct. So
yeah.
the net effect of all the proposals would be to remove 105 of the places that we can currently offer in our schools.
Yeah.
I think I can address the point about the capping versus the published admissions number. Schools must publish ahead of time the number of children they can bring into reception classes, and where a school is consistently operating well below their published admissions number. For example, there might be a school that can take 2 forms of entry and 60 children in every year group, and where a school is operating well below that and struggling, say, to fill 1 class, 30 children, the school might come to the local authority and say, you know, what can we do about this? How can we manage this more effectively? And we would agree a informal temporary cap, so that as applications are made for the school, we don't offer a few additional children and force them to employ another teacher for the 2nd class, which is essentially unfunded cost to the school, because there's only 2 children's worth of funding to fund a teacher for that 2nd class. So it's about the cappings are a mechanism that the schools to manage their financial impact of their low numbers they're already experiencing. All the school place planning numbers that we operate are based on formal PANs of schools. The Greater London Authority factors in the formal PANs, and the number that comes back from them as to the projection is measured against the total number of places we've got, or the total formal PANs of all of our schools. And while some of the proposals may appear to have a net effect, you know, by taking Nightingale up to 60 from 30 officially, the benefit to the local authority is that Nightingale school site is fully utilised. It's a 2-form entry school, currently only operating as a 1-form entry school. So the proposals are all about making best use of our school estate, rationalising the number of places we have and the schools we have so that they're largely all full and not operating with crippling low numbers that make them financially unviable. If we reduce the number of school places we have across the borough to closer match the demand, then we won't have this huge surplus of 600 places in our schools. So that's essentially the aim. 600 is the surplus unfilled places we have in schools, and those schools still have classes open that need to have a teacher employed for them. We need to have the supply of school places match the number of children that are coming through currently. We've currently got 600 surplus, and the forecast is that that will remain at least a surplus of 550 places for the next 10 years. So if the local authority, we can see the financial pressure schools are under by having larger intakes, but that they're not filling up, and the financial pressure is really significant and growing very clearly. It's set out in the Cabinet report very clearly. So it's incumbent on the local authority to make the supply of school places match demand, so that we're making best use of that resource.
Okay, I'm just going to bring in Councillor Hayhurst, and then I'll bring in parents, and I'll bring in Paul.
So just on that point, even with the 105 places taken out of the 600 and Councillor Gordon then calculated 695, that is still above the either GLA or Hackney recommended 5 to 10% surplus. Can you put a figure on what surplus that then leaves us with once we take away the 105? That's my first question. And my second question, just in response to the to the parent, do we then have a similar table that's at page 96 in the Cabinet report of before, say, the consultation was announced as to what the class sizes were in those those 4 schools? So the counterpoint to me saying 96 is a lot of classes below 30 was that this was done in November 2023 and people are leaving, and so therefore it doesn't represent the position before. Do we have a similar table pre-announcement?
Thank you, Chair. At the beginning of the process, because we've been to Cabinet 3 times with this conversation now, and have submitted a report with data at each stage of the process. At the beginning of the process, we would have had information with regards to at the time of going, so I can't remember, it may well have been May. I think the first time we went to Cabinet with this, and again in September, and again in December as well. So at the time, the relevant data would have informed the paper of the time.
Could one of you dig out the page so we can have a look?
Talking to parents, I know you wanted to make some other points. Can you help with? Yeah, no, not that point.
Yeah. Chair, the May report will be referenced as an appendix to the December Cabinet report.
Tom, May report is page 279.
Well, did you want to come in on this point? Then I know the parents.
Yeah, just while you're trying to locate the papers, just to pick up on David's point where we're talking about places and pupils, and depending on the context of how you speak about that, that makes a difference to how you view the information. And the context of the capping was really, as highlighted, to support schools in being able to respond to the financial position that they're in. I've worked in a one-form entry school. There's lots of benefits. The challenges is that you are literally one form, and it's very limited to draw on those resources. The two-form entry school, where the caps have been reduced, is because what you're trying to do is reduce the financial challenge that having a two-form entry school operate as a one-form entry school has a financial challenge for the school. And one of the things that the schools that were brought into scope, one of the things that we were looking at is also the deficit of the school, because it's how that school can remain sustainable with low numbers and being in financial deficit as well, which is another challenge that the school has to manage as well.
While we're still looking for these figures, I'm going to bring parents in because you did have another point. Apologies for wait. Bio, it's you have been waiting.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about the PAN from the parents' perspective. There's a couple of things, like Councillor Garbutt said, about the aims in the first place. And I do understand that the council are analysing the formal published admissions numbers, but also the schools are already operating at unofficial PANs, including some of the ones that are included in the proposals. So Princess May is in the report as having a PAN of 60, absolutely, but it's already at one form entry school. It's already operating at only 30. De Beauvoir School, which is proposed to close, is in the PAN, is in the report at 30. It's already operating at a PAN of 15. So some of these changes, you know, some of the reductions kind of have already happened because schools have unofficially reduced their PANs. And that's happened across the board. So it's, I mean, some of the figures we've quoted about it being reduced to 400, again, is because not just in the Dalston and these schools, but other schools around the borough have reduced their PANs, and they are actively doing that in order to respond to the falling rolls and in order to try and manage their deficits, as Councillor Brambles just said. You know, they're proactively doing it. But from a parent's perspective, the reason this is really, really important is that the council continues to analyse the data, the vacancy data, based on that formal PAN. But as a parent, if you're facing the prospect of your child's school closing, and you are looking at what the alternatives are, if, for instance, you know, we don't want to go to Princess May, but we're looking at what else there is in the area. We get in-year admissions information is based on the unofficial capped PANs, because that's what the schools want to do at the moment. I know that as a result of this process, Princess May might go back up again, but at the moment, there are very few vacancies in Princess May because it's now effectively a one-form school. And if you wanted to go to Holy Trinity, which I don't because it's a faith school and I have no particular interest in going to a faith school, but Holy Trinity is now formally a two-form school, but unofficially it's a one-form school and it's pretty much full. So you talked earlier about where the children will go if Colveston and De Beauvoir schools close, and the answers are that it's quite limited in Dalston at the moment. Holy Trinity is now undertaking a formal consultation to reduce its PAN. I don't think it takes effect until September 2025 or something. It's longer than this process that we're discussing at the moment, but that's looking to formally reduce to a one-form school. The other schools in the area are a Catholic school. De Beauvoir will close. Princess May is then quite a little way, but I mean, not an unmanageable walk. Shacklewell is essentially at the moment full. It's very, very few vacancies. It's a popular outstanding school. Alternatively, you have Halley House as a free school, or you've got the Academy School of Mossbourne, all of them. And there's another, is in Islington, St Jude and St Paul Faith School, which does have vacancies. But again, it depends if you want to send your child to a faith school. And you've got statistics from the council saying that parents in general don't want faith schools. And one of our, sorry, I'm getting slightly off the point, but one of our bugbears about this whole process is that there's been an awful lot of, the faith schools haven't been included in the process, despite the fact there's an awful lot of vacancies at the faith schools. It's very difficult to reduce the PAN figures to the level that they're wanting to without addressing the vacancies at the faith schools, because they're such a large proportion. But I hope that helped with the pan, because it's really important from a parent's perspective. The difference between the formal and the unofficial is really important when you're trying to choose a place, because that's what you get given by the in-year admissions team. But that's not how they've been analysing it in the reports. It makes a big difference.
Thank you very much. Did you?
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to make a point of clarification from an officer, the statement earlier around family housing. Just a quick one, which is as part of the LP 33, there is planned family housing within the catchment area for Culverston, and in the council's own documentation, 3-bedroom family homes, of which there'll be 200 within the vicinity. And again, to your point, where will those children be schooled? Thanks.
I'm now going to ask Paul Senior to respond to those points. I know that Councillor Adebayo has been waiting very patiently to come in, so I'll come to you next to respond to those points. So I think really, in particular, the challenges that have been vividly described concerning parents of Culverston trying to find their choice of alternative schooling for their children within the area. And secondly, in relation to whether there is any more scope for faith schools to be within, this process. I'd like to have that question answered as well. So, the challenge really for parents finding places, alternative places.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to the May Cabinet report, if you can go to pages 20 to 32, it sets out the figures as of the January census of that year of the 6 schools that are in scope. With regards to, obviously, a gentle reminder that the Mayor of the day and the Deputy Mayor did write to government expressing concerns about seeking additional powers for local authorities to actually move and to look at the whole system management as opposed to just focusing on maintained schools. Much as we have 58 primary schools locally, not all of them, as you'll imagine, are within the jurisdiction of the local authority to enforce or lead or direct in this space. So with regards to faith schools, we are in a programme of dialogue and engagement with the diocese, the Anglican diocese, as well as the Roman Catholic diocese, and there are planned processes in place which may well fall into scope over the next year or two as well, because there are schools in that particular part of the system where they are experiencing challenges with regards to pupil numbers. But obviously, because it's a diocese school, naturally this process is slightly different, that we would have to engage the relevant diocese at the beginning of the process and work very, very closely with them. The Roman Catholic diocese and the Anglican diocese have actually been very proactive in engaging with us on a regular basis to look at schools where there are pressure points. But just to be clear, we've begun a dialogue. In fact, we've begun a dialogue over a year ago, and that's ongoing. And we're not to say that any actions may not take place, because it's very possible that it will do so. But again, I don't wish to focus on any one part of the system, whether it be academies or free schools or our faith schools or the maintained schools. We look at it as our family schools locally. And unfortunately, the data tells us that we have too many surplus places in the system, and we have to make these tough choices. I'd like to bring back in Natalie, just to talk a little bit more about the GLA query, because I'm mindful that there may be 1 or 2 bits that she wanted to add to what we've added already. Natalie, do you wish to come in?
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just going back to the GLA population projections, if I can briefly. So obviously they are projections that are produced by the GLA for all London boroughs. And they certainly do take into account extent permissions, extent planning permissions. So that's sites that have planning permission but haven't yet been implemented. But they also do, my understanding is from speaking to the GLA, that they also take into account other known sites. And the GLA have available to them their own evidence on this in the form of something called a strategic housing land availability assessment, which is the key piece of evidence that the GLA produce with boroughs to identify the capacity for housing growth across London. So that was the key piece of evidence that informed both the local plan housing target and the London plan housing target. And then in addition to that, individual boroughs send updated housing trajectories, and certainly the GLA have asked that from the planning service. So we continue to update them with details of our known sites as well as those sites with extant planning permission. Hopefully that's provides a bit more clarity.
Thank you very much. So just to really clarify a bit further, the point from the parent in relation to that the Dalston Pacific plan includes provision for family homes where there will be children seeking schooling, and the numbers of that, you've got a number just so that we're clear on the specifics of this issue. Thank you.
So that's a figure that's come up that the GLA produced through their through their pupil projections, based on the information that we provide to them alongside other information. So it's something that they provide. So we don't calculate that individually ourselves.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just let you briefly, but then Councillor Adebayo has been waiting very patiently to make a contribution. So I'm just going to let Helen in briefly, and then on this point.
Thanks, Grace. Thank you. I'd just like to bring us back to one of the call-in reasons, the consideration and evaluation of alternatives. We've always stated that we regret this wasn't a holistic review of provision of places across the borough, and it's clear that if conversations have been going on for over 12 months with the diocese, that the long list should have been shared much earlier. And I'd just like to take that back to one of the key points of the call-in. Incredibly disappointed to hear that those conversations, when we were first made aware of this whole process at Easter last year, that this was going to be put into conversation, but we now find out that this has been going on for over a year. Again, this is about offering parents what they want, and Hackney's own surveys have shown that a lot of parents would prefer not to send their children to a faith school, and to hear that these conversations were happening before we were even engaged frustrates us even more.
Much. Sorry, I know you're waiting, Councillor Adebayo. I just really want to maybe just ask Paul and Councillor Bramble again. I mean, we obviously have heard from parents really about the challenge of finding school places in the Dalston area. I mean, I just really want to hear your response to that, because we're hearing very clearly from parents that it's very challenging to find suitable education of their choice within, their absolutely rational criteria of not wanting to send them to a faith school and, wanting to keep families together. And they're finding that very challenging to find that within the local Dalston area from Culverton School. Is there any sort of further response really on that point?
Thank you, Chair. Hackney has many reasons to be proud of our education system, with approaching 98% of our local schools being good or outstanding. We like to feel that many of our schools offer a fair, comparable offer and learning experience for Hackney's children. When we're held to account by the Department for Education and Ofsted for the quality of practice and the impact of our schools, it's not often that we find a school that's inappropriate in response to local needs. We have 58 primary schools in a very small geographical area. So we feel that the offer is comparable, it's relevant in response to local needs, and naturally parental choice is important and it's key here. So we have no role to try and avoid that, but we have many schools in Hackney within reason, and parents have choice as well. But David, I know our team has done a lot of work in this space. Is there anything you'd want to add after Councillor Bramble has said, or go first?
I think the point made on capping is well heard, but because they are informal arrangements, at any given time that cap can be negotiated, changed and worked with the school to be able to accommodate additional children if that need is in place. And David may or may not want to touch on that, because I know that's been a concern. So, there are schools, if you, for example, you don't choose a faith school or a free school or an academy, there are maintained schools where that capacity can be looked at, because some of those schools are 2-form entry anyway, or albeit a bigger primary school, some are 3-form. David?
So, to any rise in future demand, we have too many schools that are 3-form entry size or 2-form entry size, but are only filling to 1-form entry or 2-form entry. So we've got a lot of empty space in our schools, and this is the rationalisation we're talking about. That comes at a cost of maintaining large sites but only having 1 form of entry. And so, Princess May is a perfect example of a school that can accommodate 2 forms of entry. It's only operating a 1-form entry at a cost to the school and to the local authority. And that's exactly the sort of capacity that would be employed to place children. It's the proposal to offer a guaranteed place should Culverstone close at Princess May would allow families to move together to a nearby site. We can't continue to have 58 primary schools with 600 surplus places. It's just not sustainable into the future. And if we're talking about the long-term goals of the council in terms of education for our children, if we do not take this really serious action of rationalising the school estate, we continue to have empty schools, or schools that are not financially viable because they're not full enough. They're just, a lot of half-empty schools offering choice to parents is not a sustainable long-term outcome for Hackney education.
Thanks very much. I've got a long list of people wanting to speak. So if you can keep your remarks very brief. I have promised Councillor Adebayo to come in, so I'm going to ask her to come in and then we can pick up further points. And there are also Councillor Billington and Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. During the consultation, 92% of local residents expressed strong feelings against the closure / the merger of Covington. With their feelings or the opinions of the residents, I'm just wondering whether their opinion doesn't count. And on Covington, I spoke to some residents of the parents who said already they are struggling to get a space in year 4 for their kids at Princess May. And this is not what the council promised. And 24% of Covington School students are special needs students. Will it not be better if Covington is converted to special needs school?
That's very helpful. I'm now going to come on to Councillor Billington and then Councillor Potter, who both got questions.
Thank you. A couple of questions. I mean, with respect, these parents are not challenging the overall principle of the fact that the school estate is too large. They're making the case for their specific school. And I think that goes to some of the questions around the criteria that was applied and whether there were exceptional circumstances with Culverstone that needed to have been considered and were not considered, and therefore the criteria that was applied applied unfairly. I'd like the administration to respond on that question. I would also therefore like to challenge the parents on, if this consultation is wrong, surely it's wrong for all the 4 schools. And why are you making the case almost 99% of it about Culverstone, a little bit about Baden-Powell, and nothing about the other 2 schools? I'll declare an interest. I'm a councillor for de Beauvoir School. It's heartbreaking to see that school close, and I'm concerned about that. And thirdly, I would know that Mike wanted to ask to clarify further about consultation, and I'm interested to know exactly what your concerns are more clearly about the nature of consultation, because I know that there are legal requirements, and it will be the legal requirements that will be fundamental on this issue of Courtland.
I think I'll get a response from the parent group to that first, and then I'll come on to the Education Authority. Mike, did you want to go first and then Helen? So
Certainly, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for your question. Perhaps it's simplest just to clarify what the the legal principles on a legal consultation are, if I just read them. If a public body chooses to consult, it must do so lawfully, and the basic requirements are colloquially known as the Gunning principles or the Sedley principles.
Sorry, Mike, can I just clarify what you're reading from? Just say that for the record, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is reading from our pre-action legal letter. I believe it's on page 671 to 672 of the document that you have as a briefing paper for this meeting. Particularly, we object on the basis of principles 1 and 2. Principle 1 states consultation must be at a time when the proposals are still at a formative stage. I'll give an example of this. Already in the informal consultation period, the admissions hotline was advising parents not to transfer to Culverstone School because it was closing. That's in the informal stage. And also that up until the formal stage of the consultation, so after the main kind of public push for responses to the consultation, the proposals were still being erroneously described as a merger, and in public meetings during that period, representatives of the council were stating that staff and students would be amalgamated on a new school site, or a new site, let's say one of the two schools. I say new there because in order to amalgamate a school and move staff as well as pupils, you would actually need to close two schools and open a new one on one of the two sites. But under current legislation, that would result in a free school, as your estate strategy states and specifically advises you against doing. And therefore, these are closures, not mergers. And the second point of the legal guidance is the proposer must give sufficient reasons for any proposal to permit of intelligent consideration and response. This is particularly a point in relationship to the available data. A recent case in Northern Ireland has kind of clarified this as of the end of last year, which I'm sure the legal advisor will know about, that the information that can be requested and should be supplied could be quite, or could be extremely granular in nature. So in the first case, I note Councillor Bramble's response to the question of deeds. Now, there is no reason why deeds cannot be shared with the public. It's a perfectly reasonable and conventional FOI request if they're not already in the public domain. We've been specifically requesting the deeds from 1906, which is when the LCC took control of the school, and which we believe are educational covenants. And we believe that from people that have seen them. They have still not been made public to us. The councillor suggested that that would jeopardize future financial arrangements. But if I understand that we're in a consultation, then they would have been supplied to the cabinet members at the very least to inform the decisions that they were making, because they would fundamentally potentially limit future use or even potentially revoke ownership, as has been the case, and for which there are recent legal examples for which we've supplied to the council.
Thank you. I'm now going to go on to Paul. We've obviously got the outstanding question about the challenge in the other schools, which I'll come on to. Yeah,
thank you, Chair. The views of all stakeholders who engage with the consultation process are incredibly important. Much as the messages are incredibly difficult, unfortunately, no new information came forwards in terms of new developments or proposals or alternatives to inform a change of proposed direction. With regards to the colleagues, you'll remember, excuse me, the September Cabinet report, Appendix F, set out clearly the meaning and impact of merge and amalgamate. And remember, officers were working to DfE guidance in terms of the language and narrative to be deployed. Specifically for staff, this process would mean that the staff who are currently working at the closing school would be at risk of being made redundant, as merging and amalgamating the children may not result in new jobs being created in the host school. Firstly, as stated earlier, the parents may not choose to move their children to the host school, therefore opportunities for additional roles in the host school will only be known following completion of the school admissions process. However, as part of the drive to avoid redundancies as much as possible, We are seeking to obtain agreement from the host school and the Hackney families of schools to support job opportunities for those staff at risk of redundancy. And that's quoted from the September Cabinet report, paragraph 6.9 on page 21.
Thank you. And I'll now ask the parents to respond to Councillor Billington's other question. Yeah, thank you for your.
Thank you. To respond about all of the schools, obviously that's difficult being the parent at one school, but I'll try. Do you want to? Well, I mean, I think first of all, we did try and meet with other parents from other schools. We didn't try initially to do this alone, but there wasn't always parent groups at the other schools who were willing and interested to try and have those conversations. So, I mean, that we did try, definitely. And obviously we did think that there are some things about the Culverston situation that is slightly different. Obviously there's been change over the 3 years. It's kind of a sort of local history, which is perhaps slightly different than the other schools, or that's something I don't know in depth about the other schools. But there are other things. There's the Dalston plan that we've been talking about. There's the proposal for a 21st century street immediately outside the primary school to have this innovative idea of, a closed street for play and for children, which I still think is incredible to go ahead with without actually any children in the school next to it. And, it is a grade 2 listed building right in the middle of Dalston in a conservation area. I know that doesn't necessarily preclude it from becoming something else, but it was built as a school. And we strongly felt that it should remain a school. So there are some unique things about Culverston's campaign and Culverston as a school. I know that the head teacher from Randall Kramer has been in the press and was very vociferous about various different things. But yeah, shall I pass on to?
I think Councillor Binny Lovett's going to come in. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to bring in Councillor Binny Lovatt, if that's okay at this point. I've seen that, yes.
Thank you. Yes, just continuing in response to Councillor Billington's question about why we haven't brought all of the schools into this call-in and have tried to narrow the focus. Part of that is to make sure that in terms of bringing solutions and next steps and alternatives to the table, that we were as focused as we could be. In addition, as you said, the consultation issues mostly came up with these two schools, as we saw, because these two schools are the ones who who started parent groups doing campaigns to try and save those schools, and both of those campaigns acknowledged that there were issues with the consultation. And I think that there was some acknowledgement on the council's part that there were some issues with the consultation, in that teachers at Baden Powell, for example, were given the impression that there would be transfers of jobs. And I know from the meeting I attended at the school with parents and with Councillor Bramble and Councillor Woodley at the time, the impression that I got, and I think the parents got, was that teachers would be brought over with their pupils. And there was a big sense that would be really essential in terms of easing the transition, especially for pupils who send pupils. So I think that's one of the key reasons why we thought the focus on these two schools is because those issues are raised around the consultation were raised by these schools, and we weren't aware of those issues being raised by parents or staff at other schools, nor having had those issues, because I suppose there are particular issues around this idea of an amalgamation as well. Thank you.
Councillor Billington, did you want to come back on that, or I'll move on to Councillor Potter?
I'm still not quite clear about whether the criteria for identifying the schools for amalgamation is entirely consistent across and therefore how they were selected, because it looks like, from what the parents are suggesting, is that there were particular circumstances with Culverston which might have driven lower roles that needed to have been factored in. So I continue to be concerned about that, and I'm also puzzled by the issues around the consultation, because what Councillor Binny Lubbock and Mike are saying is quite serious claims about what was said about the future of people's jobs and the future prospects of pupils in that consultation. And that seems to me quite serious about the process of the consultation. I'd like some reassurances from the administration or some clarification on that.
Deputy Mayor Bramble, then.
I'm happy to stop, Chair, and defer to David to come in. If I could pick up on Councillor Adebayo's comment around special educational needs provision, and it's an important one, and it is one that as administration we did discuss, and we know that Mayor Woodley still leads on the SEND brief, and one of the things that we're really excited about is the 300 new places for special educational needs that we've committed to. All of the schools in scope, of course, we did think about how can we have those places in those schools, but it wasn't as straightforward as that. And if I think one of the suggestions was made that it becomes a special educational need provision, if that happened, we'd have to close the school for that to happen, and that's not what I thought parents would want in terms of closing. If the school is closed and then it reopens, the only way that it can be opened, and David, feel free, I'm not pressured to correct me, is that it then would have to be a free school, because we don't have the powers to be able to open a school in that way. To have the existing school and to expand it in terms of SEN provision, I think that was looked at, but it wasn't been able to. I think it was around, I don't know, David, it was around adaptions or the suitability and of the site, and so that wasn't considered an option. Just back on the point of promises been made to staff. Now, I did say before there was some clarity around language in terms of merge and amalgamation, and we did acknowledge that, and that was correct in the report. But in terms about promises made around staff going to different places, that wasn't my recollection. If you go back to the September report in Appendix F, it sets out also explaining the difference between amalgamation and mergers to make that clearer, if that language wasn't clearer before, we acknowledged that. But it talked about the process would mean that current staff at a school would be at risk of redundancy as children if parents chose them to go to a host school, and the council would want to work with the host school to think about if there are vacancies that those staff will be considered, because no one wants any member of staff to be at risk of redundancy. But there's no recollection from me, an officer, happy for officers to disagree with me, around promising and reassuring, because there's no legal framework for us to mandate that had the decision go through, there's no way for us to legally mandate or legislate that those staff have to go there. You know, the children can go there, and we can talk about expanding and making provisions for the children to go there, but there's no legal or legislative framework for us to mandate that staff go there. And the September report in Appendix F states out what we said around staffing. Of course, we would want staff to go with children. Of course, we'd want that. We would encourage that. If there are vacancies at the school, of course, we want those staff to apply, and of course, we would hope those staff are successful. That's what we want, and that's what we would advocate. But we can't legislate or mandate or make a promise around that. And I don't remember any of us promising that. And if you just go to that, the September report in Appendix F, that it sets out what we said around staffing. I'll pause there, Chair, because I'm conscious of time, but you may want to bring in David.
Thank you. I mean, I'm very conscious of time as well, and we are going to have to, we've got a limited amount of time. Can I very briefly bring in Helen, and then I'm going to move on to Councillor Parr.
Thank you, and thanks for your question, because we genuinely believe this is a consultation in name only. You know, back to Mike's point about the legalities around the consultation being at a time when proposals are still at a formative stage, you know, at pre-consultation, informal consultation, and consultation. At no point were we listened to. I genuinely have more consultation and correspondence with the council if a bike hanger is proposed to be put out on the street outside my house, let alone the education of the children across the borough. You don't know how many children are going to go to Princess May because you haven't asked us. You know, at no point were we involved in conversations. At no point, you know, did you think about what the demand might be? Because you didn't talk to us. You didn't go to the parents across the borough and say, hey, what do you want? And then when you did, you didn't listen to us when the 94% of us said we're not interested in this. And it's disingenuous to say that you are here to listen and get the best for the residents of this borough. And I am disappointed and really freaking cross, really cross that you haven't listened to us. You know, and you've been in those meetings, all of you, and it's not cool.
Look, microphone, apologies, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. This is incredibly difficult. We recognise this, and standing up in front of those parent groups, the parent engagement sessions throughout the process, meetings with staff, meetings with parents, and trying to find the best possible solution to a very, very difficult situation that has set out in the Cabinet report in September. I don't want to harp on that because, as Deputy Mayor Bramble has made it very clear, obviously it was in the governing bodies of schools will be responsible for what staffing situation and what staff transfer over and making those decisions as well. But when we talk about Princess May, I think one of the big drivers for Princess May is the ability to keep family groups together, friendship groups together as well, if they wanted to go over. And obviously parental choice will be key here. Parents will decide which school they want their children to go to. So much as we say, asking the parents which school they want to go to, parental choice will be key here. So we're not in a position to know what the numbers are. Parents will make an informed decision at the right time. If this process goes through, parents will make a choice. Some parents have decided to vote with their feet already in some of the other schools. We've seen that. But naturally, once the local authority has that data, that we have to make the tough decision on the future of the schools. We're at liberty to engage. We're held to account by the regulator for efficient use of resources. Efficient use of resources is a system that sees us, unfortunately, 600 empty seats in the primary estate, losing the education system £30 million per annum at the moment, which isn't sustainable. So we're held to account quite seriously by the regulator for inaction in this space. So it's important that we move on this.
Chair, just a quick point about the offer.
Going to have to be very
of Colveston parents have the choice to go to Princess May. It wasn't dependent on that school. It wasn't based on that all parents would go there. It was based on the offer that if all parents as a community wanted to move to another school to keep those friendship groups, to keep those networks, that offer was there. But ultimately, as Paul said, there is a parental choice if parents want to take that collective offer. It was a collective offer if parents choose to do so.
Very briefly, Councillor Hayhoe, Councillor Potter's been waiting.
So just to be absolutely clear, there are, the Cabinet report says places will be available at Princess May, and places are available at Princess May, which is walkable from Colveston. So I'm just trying to understand what then is the concern about there not being anywhere to go in Dalston if places are being offered at Princess May. I'm missing a point, sorry.
Yeah, very briefly, thank you.
We did our own survey, and I've forgotten the figures, but 95% of the parents that we surveyed at school at the beginning of this process didn't want to go to Princess May. We all chose Colveston. None of us had Princess May. I think it was only about 3 of the people that we surveyed even had Princess May as one of the 6 schools that they'd selected when they first chose a primary school. Unfortunately, Princess May doesn't have a great reputation. I can't, I'm not trying to, but amongst the parents, I'm not trying to make a big statement, but that was just a reflection of parent views at that point in time. Also now, I have to be honest, we've talked about the sustainability of the school. Princess May don't know how many pupils are going to be coming to it in September. I understand that as a school, it's 2 form, it's gone down to 1 form, it's underutilised in terms of the space, but potentially this proposal could put it in the situation of having 40 students per year group, which is a really challenging number to manage because it's not a full second form. It's not even it's a third full second form. How on earth, even with vertical, I mean, it's really challenging. Yes, I understand the council's point about wanting to make sure that not having underutilised schools, but when you have to then grow them, that gets tricky too.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to hear Paul and Councillor Bramble. I can see that Councillor Patrick, you want to come in on this point as well, do you? I mean, I know that Councillor Potter's been waiting very, very patiently, and I've also got Mike online, and that's going to be the end of it, I think, with this particular point, because we do have I've got certainly got one other substantive point in addition to Councillor Potter's, and we are going to have to move on. So, okay, I'll very briefly bring in Paul and Councillor Bramble, preferably one of you, just before you sort of address these issues. I mean, I would just really like to make the point that if there is, heaven forbid, a future situation like this, it would be better if there are existing relationships between the schools involved for amalgamations. Paul, do you want to go on that, and then bring in Mike?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not here to defend any of our schools. I'm proud of every one of our schools across the local area. All 81 of our schools, I have mentioned earlier, 98% Hackney schools are good or outstanding. Princess May is rated by the recent Austin inspection as a good school. I'm not comfortable with reputations of other schools being discussed in this forum in the way this has been done so far. I think it's inappropriate, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Patrick?
Thank you. I can understand why the parents of Culverston are upset. Sounds like a lovely school. But parents put forward various plans and suggestions to keep Culverston open. Could you perhaps go through why they were rejected and why Culverston isn't? Sorry, I've got a cold and a cough. Isn't for the future. Sorry, look at the words. Isn't viable for the future. Sorry. Why the local authority thinks it's not viable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Patrick. I think Councillor Bramble had touched on some of that already. In the interest of time, before that question's answered, I'm just going to bring in Mike as well in case there's something that's substantive that can respond to together. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just responding to the councillor's question, staff were told in the initial briefings that they would be offered, or that they would be that it was a true merger, and that all staff would be selected for the kind of merged school from a pool of all staff. So a true merger. Okay, that was in the initial briefings for staff. And just reading from the cabinet report, this is from page 224-25. It's the council's notes for one of the briefings given by the representatives in front of you at Baden-Powell. Question: are teachers from this school going to be present in Nightingale School? Answer: no one school would have all the staff in the merged school. Some staff from both schools would be present. There are some decisions that cannot be discussed in full detail until a final decision has been made. There will be staff from both schools to help the transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Councillor Binny Lovett, do you want to make a very, very brief point now, and then I'll bring in Paul, and then we're going to move on to Councillor Potter.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a similar point as what Mike just made in response to what Councillor Bramble said. I was in that meeting, and I remember the head teacher saying that his red line for working with the council was that teachers were transferred, and none of the people present in that meeting made it clear that that wouldn't be the case. And clearly there has been some misunderstandings as part of this consultation, because the council had to go back and apologise to the teachers at Baden-Powell for the misunderstanding that there would be transfers. So I think that's quite a key point there.
So Paul, I'm reluctant to bring you in, Helen. We've just had quite a number of contributions on this. Sorry. Yeah. Councillor Hayhurst, you're looking at me? No, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll bring in Paul then.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
I think we've answered on a number of occasions that Hackney has great schools. We have outstanding teachers, outstanding teaching staff, outstanding support staff in all of our schools. Where possible, we would want to naturally use best endeavours to retain as many of these staff through such a process of closing or amalgamating schools. So we will use best endeavours, and naturally we will have to wait to see what that looks like in terms of the amount of learners that transition over from certain schools. In some of the schools where we're already seeing growth as a result of children leaving schools earlier, before any final decision has been made, we've actually invested in a number of those schools with additional resources to enable those schools to actually strengthen their establishment capacity. So we will always look to retain as many of our staff, our wonderful staff, as best as possible, but it's not in our gift as a local authority to give concrete guarantees that staff will be transferring over. There will be staff naturally, and we will look to find ways where possible to ensure the transition is as smooth as possible for the learners, because it's in the best interest of the children that we get that continuity. But our head teachers and the chair of governors of those respective schools will be making final decisions on what their establishments look like and what their staff needs are.
There's also Councillor Patrick's question really in relation to the alternative proposals for Culverston School that were put forward. So if you could please go through that.
Section 7 of the Cabinet report covers that in terms of the alternatives pertaining to Culverston, Chair.
It'd be really helpful if they, just for the sake, I mean, if you could just very briefly please go through them and why they were rejected. I think that's what we need to hear. Thank
you. Viability and sustainability, Chair. So we have to look at the long term, and it may well be that we get short-term solutions and short-term fixes. But ultimately, when we're holding schools to account with regards to particular criteria, and colleagues will remember that the school estate strategy first went to Cabinet in 2022 in this local area. The criteria followed not long after that. The criteria for schools to be in scope for selection for potential intervention or change has been in the arena for approaching 2 years now. So the criteria is not a recent development. The criteria is the one that all of our schools have been made aware of and has been in place from the outset of the dialogue with all of our schools.
I do apologise, Paul. I mean, I think what Councillor Patrick was looking for, I mean, she can speak for herself, was, I think, was it page 23 of the papers where there's listed, so Councillor Patrick, do you have a particular list of questions? Maybe it's better if you did go through them.
I mean, one of the things that the parents put forward was to add a special needs department onto the school, which obviously would have increased pupil numbers. And we know that there's a shortage of SEN places in the borough. And one of the things, sorry, at the original discussions, I remember of not schools weren't mentioned at the time. We hadn't decided which schools were going forward. Was that some of the schools would have either be transferred into SEN schools, or the SEN departments could be added to schools to add to their viability. I just wonder why, whether anything, we looked at that for Culverston.
Chair, as Deputy Mayor Bramble set out in the meeting, we have commissioned as a local authority 300 additional specialist provision places to come on stream over the coming years in response to local needs. If the local authority were to close Culverston School with a view to opening new provision, local authorities no longer within the legislative framework can open those schools. We don't have the power to do so. It would have to be a free school, which would then be autonomous outside a local authority jurisdiction. So we couldn't close one school and open another school. So that's important as a key consideration. Colleagues are aware of the legislative framework. We simply cannot open new special schools. That's outside of our jurisdiction. And coming back to some of those other alternatives in terms of merging Culverston and Princess May on the Culverston site, that was suggested. However, this option was considered infeasible, as the Culverston site, I'm sure colleagues will be aware, is unable to accommodate the children from Princess May as well. It doesn't have the capacity, the size. The decision to propose a merger on the Princess May site was positively impact the school's falling role and unused capacity, which is why that option is more viable. Merging Culverston with other schools in Blossom Federation was suggested. However, these options were considered unsuitable due to the distance between Culverston and the other schools in the Federation. Merging de Beauvoir and Culverston on the Culverston site was also considered. However, based on pupil numbers at the time, Culverston appeared unable to accommodate all the children from de Beauvoir. The subsequent drop in pupil numbers at both schools makes this option feasible in terms of pupil numbers. However, this was not favoured due to Culverston's financial position. Amalgamating into a one-form entry school is not financially preferable. It has been proposed by those in support of Culverston to try to keep it open that it could be a school for pupils with SEND. However, in the short, this option is unfeasible because the school would need to be closed with building modifications and also the legislative framework, which I've alluded to earlier. The local authority cannot open new schools.
I'll very briefly bring in Helen and Councillor Garbett. Mike, I'll only bring you in if there's something somebody else hasn't said.
So many things, but thank you. Just to be clear, we were always interested in a more kind of fuller SEN integrated learning offer rather than closing Culverston down and opening up a whole new provision. We understand that, you know, the kind of restrictions that sit within that. All along the way, we have been asking for how we might be able to have an impact on the decision and what the consultation was for. What did you want to hear from us that could make change? We were continually asked to come back with creative ideas and ways of making things happen. We also came, you know, the concept of merging de Beauvoir and Culverston is a viable option. And for you to talk about the financial evaluation is disingenuous, as we have here a message from an officer sent in October stating that our focus, the council's focus, has been squarely on the future financial viability and sustainability rather than what has occurred in the past.
Helen, I'm not sure what you're reading from there. Is that part of the papers? If it is, yeah.
It's not part of the papers. It
Yeah.
is a message that has underpinned the whole of this, which is around the financial viability of Culverston and it being
Okay, thank you.
running in surplus, even though the council believes it not to be.
Thank you. Councillor Garber, did you want?
It was just to further highlight that point around the criteria, and yes, we appreciate the criteria has been out there, and I think that really speaks to the heart of what we're getting to in terms of at what point the consultation could have made any difference if you'd already decided the criteria that you were making the decisions on.
You've been waiting extremely patiently.
A lot of my questions have been covered in the subsequent debate, but I suppose I suppose I'd like to have clarity as well from what Councillor Adebayo was asking about. So you are guaranteeing places for the children from Culverston and Princess May, and when will you be increasing the informal PAN to allow parents in all of the year groups? So you are clarifying those places for all of the year groups because there was a concern about one particular year. Am I correct? So that is, yeah, so that's clear. And the other thing I wanted to clarify, you talked about the 200 new homes for families. Now, Natalie, is she still, Natalie Broughton, is she still here? So when you talked about, you know, the GLA and the figures you feed in, I mean, are you recognising the 200 homes that Helen was talking about? And have those figures been fed into the GLA, that specific development to help to inform the school place demand predictions?
Reporter, can you switch your microphone off?
Yeah, sure.
Do you want me to come back on that, Chair?
Yes.
So the Dalston plan plans for around 600 new homes. And that forms part of the housing target within our local plan, which will have been available and factored into, derived from what's called the Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment, which informed the London plan and the local plan. So that's the evidence that the GLA produce themselves and have available to them. I'm not sure what the 200 homes refers to. If you could just clarify.
Did you say
So the LP 33 Dalston plan states that of the 600 homes, 200 would be 3-bedroom affordable family housing, which would give us 100 children in the short to medium term, and between 100 and 150 children aged between 0 and 4 in the sort of downstream.
Do you recognise that, Natalie, that there will be more children coming into?
Yeah, so if I can come back on that. So what the GLA pupil projections do is they will that they factor in an assumption around the type of housing that will come forward. But my understanding is that they do that across, from speaking to the GLA, my understanding is that they have a standard methodology for that across London. So they apply the same to kind of Hackney as they would do to Outer London, where it's likely that actually you get more family type housing that comes forward. So I think it's factored in that way, rather than an individual kind of approach to kind of looking at what might come forward in individual areas. But I suppose the 200 would be based on the local plan borough-wide policy on housing mix, and that is the same throughout the borough. So we through the planning process, we seek to get a mix of housing. So that's kind of where that figure comes from, just applying the borough-wide local plan policy to the development sites.
Follow up on that, is it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Go.
Thank you. Sorry, it's just taken us back to the information you provided in respect of feasibility studies. It was quite brief, and likewise in terms of the report. So I was just trying to understand. We've heard mention of surplus in some of the schools that are recorded as having deficit, particularly pertinent given the approach to de Beauvoir and Colston potentially amalgamating, and that being considered viable but financially problematic. And I think when you consider the fact that the school has made great strides in terms of improving its financial status, I'd be interested to know the kind of information that was shared amongst the consultation with parents in terms of that decision-making process. And likewise, Councillor Patrick's question wasn't answered in full. She was kind of suggesting an annex to Colston with additional SEND provision as opposed to an entirely new school. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also very interested in the answer to the annex to Colston, yeah, I don't want to confuse the position with multiple questions, but I will pick up on it. It was forgotten. Is also in relation to the future plans for these sites, because there was originally an undertaking that they would remain within the educational estate. And I'd like to hear a sort of up-to-date position on that. I mean, particularly in relation to Colston, which, as parents have pointed out, is in the beating heart of the community in Dalston. So if we can answer those questions, I'm then going to very briefly bring in Mike after that, and we're going to draw things to a close because we are.
Okay, situation regarding Culverston is that we're looking at over the next 12 months, probably the deficit increasing by £400,000 to being in excess of £1 million on current trajectory. So we're talking about having gone from the current 600,000 to over £1 million. With regards to the potential for an additional resource-based provision at Culverston School and Art, any art provision, if we don't open a special school, close a school to open a special school, as I said earlier, any art provision to run alongside a school would have to be financially viable. The school that's running a deficit close to in excess of £1 million is not financially viable or sustainable.
Very cool. I mean, I think the question, forgive me if it was wrong, was that consideration being given to using part of the premises for additional SEN provision and keeping Culverston School open in the remaining part of the premises? I think that's the question that we've been asking. Is that's probably covered by your financial viability, but I just really want to hear that specific question, keeping part of the school open and using the rest of the premises for SEND.
So Chair, are you suggesting to open an additional resource-based provision, just keeping that open?
Oh, and keeping the school open. I think that's what parents are asking.
If the school is not financially viable,
Sharing the building.
If the school is not financially viable, any additional resource-based provision, the rationale why you would have an ARP is to allow for integration between the children in the ARP and the mainstream school. So if the school is not sustainable or viable financially, I'm afraid would you set up an ARP provision, have some of the most vulnerable children in that school, in the local area, knowing that potentially in a short period of time, we may have to close the school and creating the provision of putting our most vulnerable children in a provision that wasn't sustainable. Apologies, that would not be appropriate, given the context.
Councillor Hayhurst, very briefly.
We'll just on this point, there does in any event have a provision that we want to integrate SEN provision with wider, with the rest of the school cohort. So essentially setting up an entire annex of a SEND unit run contrary to other sort of established principles where we try and do integration across the rest of the school estate.
Yeah, obviously there was a process from 2021, as you're all aware, in terms of bringing in additional resource provision across schools, and schools were invited to make expressions of interest at that time. So that those commitments were made on the back of investigations following those expressions of interest, partly based on, as Paul described, the viability of the school, but also the suitability of the provision, where we could add those units, where we could add that additional space, essentially, for those pupils, and where it was appropriate for them to integrate with the school. So those commitments were made. It's not to say that there won't be new funding coming in and new expressions of interest called and new provision secured in the future. There's an example at the moment with social emotional mental health unit that we're developing across Stoke Newington School. We've just opened ARP at Simon Marks, and also working on one at Nightingale. So that will offer for those children that are moving across from Baden Powell an opportunity to have the benefits of having that ARP on site there. But I think there's a timing question there, as well as the viability of the school. I believe Culverston had been sort of looked at in terms of suitability, in terms of its kind of infrastructure as well, and was rejected, but I would probably need someone else to kind of verify that, but that was my understanding. This did come up at previous meetings of Cabinet.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you want to come up on that point? Then I will give the, I think the final word to you, Mike, and then, yeah.
I just wanted to clarify the financial viability of Culverston. It's included in the Cabinet report, so it's set out really clearly that the school's own forecasts of their end of year position shows a growing deficit, and that's the school's forecast. And that forecast, it's really worth noting, the forecast is based on an assumption of 30 children joining reception over the next 3 years. So I think we need to be clear that it's not the own school business manager submitted, because the school's in deficit, worked closely with the finance team, and that's their submission of where the end of year position over the coming 3 years. It's not a fabrication of the local authority.
Thank you. Do you want, sorry, I'll bring in Mike, because I know you've been waiting patiently, and then I'll...
Thank you, Chair. A couple of clarifications, if I may. Just lastly on that statement by David Court, the financial projections of the school were not based on an intake of 30 in the next, I think next series of years. In fact, they were on current numbers when that information was prepared, and they subsequently identified a huge range of savings. They were projected to go up incrementally by 1 or 2 each year, but not on 30 dead. They were made with the existing numbers. Second, on Financial viability. Financial viability, as we've established clearly this evening, is at least in part or at least considerably based upon pupil numbers. And therefore, discounting a merger with another school on financial viability doesn't make sense, because it would raise the pupil numbers in the target school, and therefore it would improve the financial position of the school. The figures that Paul Senior was quoting was on an updated financial report that show the damage that has caused by the consultation to the school. Culverstone ran a surplus in the last financial year. Many schools, I think 13 in the borough, did not. Further on pupil numbers, the issue around having integrated SEND teaching, which the Children Young Persons Committee, Scrutiny Committee pointed out is an aim, and another councillor did here. In response to that question, the councillor suggested that there were 300 SEND places being opened up in the borough in the coming years. There are 460 pupils with SEND needs who are being sent out of borough currently. So that's 160 pupils who are still, even with improvements, being sent out of borough at a cost to the borough of, I think it's between 60 and 100,000 pounds per pupil per year, which massively dwarfs any of the kind of deficits or projected deficits that we're talking about. And many of you will know that's the overwhelming proportion of the money that's being drained from the education budget. And just on the final point on the GLA figures, they're highly specific. You'll see from the report that we submitted where we make those calculations for you. I think it's, I could find the page for you, but I know we're short of time, but it's in the report. That it's specific to like a square 100 meters, right? So the school is identified in its specific geographic location, highly specifically, and then it talks about the mix of housing which is taken from the Dalston plan, and it sets different, let's say, fractional criteria for each of the type of dwelling mix in a mix of housing. And then it bases its projections on those. So the idea that it's kind of broadly London based is frankly not the case. It's really highly specific, and therefore it's very straightforward to identify what the GLA's predictions are for the increase in numbers of school-age children and preschool-age children in the short to mid-term, using the council's own criteria for the time frame for the Dalston plan. Thank you, Chair.
Very much. Do you want to make a final point, and then I'll bring in Paul?
In the last year, the council spent approximately £1 million refurbishing Culverstone building. It's Grade 2 listed. It's an incredibly beautiful building, one of the original Birkbeck schools that was set up over 100 years ago. To close all the schools will cost £3.4 million, and to maintain the security and the mothballing of the 4 vacant sites will cost £1 million a year. Just to reiterate the point there about the forecasting, the submission made by the Culverstone business team was running not at 30 pupils per year. Just want to reiterate the point that Mike has made. It was made at existing levels, not at full capacity, and I think it's a really important point to make.
Sorry, Paul, do you want to come in? And we are going to have to draw this matter.
Thank you, Chair. The comments earlier that Culverstone ran or achieved a surplus, may I remind colleagues throughout this conversation and in previous reports, the surplus was only achieved with additional one-off investment, additional investment from the local authority to that school to top up, and that the school failed to achieve its financial target that was set, because at the time, if memory serves me right, the school was running with a deficit of about £570,000, and the target was set to actually bring that down. The school failed to achieve that. With regards to the amount of children who are going out of borough to access independent, non-maintained specialist provision, due to the complexity of their needs, some of these children, their needs are so complex and so acute, many of them require residential provision, or provision where it might be 2 or 3 members of staff to one child for a period of time. An additional resource-based provision working alongside a maintained school is not going to be responsive to needs. There's absolutely no way. We talk about the graduated approach, Chair, where in an ideal scenario where a child's needs goes from being universal needs level to targeted, we would wish to use an additional resource-based provision before considering a special school. And then we'd use a special school before considering them having to go into the independent, non-maintained sector. And art fits lower down the category. We have X amount of children going into the independent sector because that's where their needs are. That's where those provisions are expensive, because the needs of those children are so complex and so acute. And in terms of the investment from the local authority on the capital of the school, once a Hackney school has Hackney children in, it's incumbent on us to ensure that those Hackney children have the best possible learning experiences possible. So we would not want them to be in a provision that wasn't fit for purpose or safe and secure. So yes, we still invest because no decision has been made as yet on the future of those schools.
Sure. Yes, just to add on the point of the investment, if schools are open and they need maintaining, we're very proud of the money that we invest in maintaining our schools. So we will invest in listed buildings when children are in there because it's important that children are safe. I want to acknowledge the work that Blossom Federation has done with Culverston. They came in, inherited a deficit that they've worked really, really hard to be able to respond to. Unfortunately, because the school poor enroll numbers have impounded, it's been really challenging them to make a deficit. I think if there wasn't that issue across London in terms of not enough children taking up school places, it might have been a different context and a different scenario, but we are in this scenario. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to draw this item to a close. Thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions. It's been a very, very thorough discussion, and thank you for letting us hear all your points. I'm just going to very quickly invite Councillor Garbutt, who's presenting this petition, to see if you've got any points to add that haven't already been made, and then we're going to withdraw to deliberate. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. No, the parents have come in and said all the points that I was going to kind of sweep up at the end to just make sure that they were being really highlighted, just in terms of just being really crystal clear around the fact that, just to build on Councillor Bramble's point there, that Culverston was in a really difficult situation, and Blossom retained all of the staff at that time and brought all the parents along with them, and then was hit with this consultation at a time when they were really just getting themselves together and getting parents kind of visiting the school. So that's why we talk about Culverston as a really kind of specific situation. But yeah, the other points I was going to summarise with have been mentioned, just the criteria, the consultation, the Dalston plan, and the financial point that Helen summarised at the end. Thank you
very much. So I'm now going to draw this item to a close, and we're going to retire with this member of the Scrutiny Panel to consider our decision. Yeah, thank you very much for the reminder. The monitoring officer very kindly reminded me that I did highlight at the beginning that there is exempt information, and that we will have to consider that in private if we want to consider it. Do members have any questions that they want to consider in relation to that exempt information? No, I don't either. Thank you. So in terms of the decision making, the decision options that are open to the panel are to take no further action, in which case the decision in relation to the closure of these two schools, namely Culverston and Baden Powell, will take effect immediately, or to refer the matter back to the Cabinet for reconsideration, setting out the nature of the panel's concerns. The Cabinet must then reconsider the matter, taking into account the concerns of the Scrutiny Panel before making a final decision, or to refer the matter to full Council if we consider that its recommendations will have an impact on the Council's budget or policy framework. So we're now going to withdraw to discuss. Thank you very much.
Mario, can you restart the live stream, please?
Okay, so thank you very much. We are very pressed for time because unfortunately this meeting has to finish at 10. So I'm just going to very briefly sum up discussions that we've had with colleagues following a very, very extensive discussion here in the chamber. So just paying attention to the stated grounds for this call-in decision in relation to the Cabinet decision to discontinue Culverstone School and Baden Powell School. We've considered the points individually. So the first one is due consultation and the taking of professional advice from officers. We've noted all the points that have been made by the parent groups and their representatives, but we are satisfied that extensive consultation was conducted and also that due consideration was given to the consultation responses in taking this decision. Secondly, in relation to the clarity of aims and the desired outcomes, although we fully recognise that this is a very distressing situation for the parents and school communities involved, we are satisfied that the local authority did have some very clear aims in making this decision, fundamentally in relation to in relation to the overwhelming need to reduce the number of unviable places in schools because of the undersubscribed nature of schools across Hackney, and we've been given some compelling evidence in relation to those figures. Thirdly, in relation to the consideration and evaluation of alternatives and the reasons for the decisions, we've had a very extensive discussion tonight and we've gone through those proposals very carefully, and although it was to an extent disappointing that a proposal for having a SEND provision in this school does appear not to be viable, we are satisfied that that has been very carefully considered and reasons have been given. Fourthly, in relation to relevant factors being considered, that all relevant factors have been considered, we have probed very extensively a number of different issues that were of concern, in particular in relation to the alternative places for children being available, and also in relation to the projected figures for future pupil numbers in that area. And we are satisfied that those figures have been considered sufficiently to make this decision. And then fifthly, where the decision would not be in the interest of the borough's residents and a preferable alternative decision could be adopted. We're also satisfied that this has not been made out. We do believe that having a viable school system based with appropriate pupil based on when the funding model is based on pupil numbers is in the interest of the residents of the borough. So I'm now going to, I think, Louise, will you do a roll call of members to vote on the decision? Just
Councillor Adejare. Microphone.
I concur.
Your option. Your option. Your decision option.
No further action.
Councillor Potter.
No further action.
Councillor Billington. No further action. Councillor Hayhurst.
No further action for the reasons Councillor Gordon set out.
Councillor Patrick.
No further action.
So vote for no further action. So I think there's no further business, so I'm now going to draw the meeting to a close, and thank you very much everyone for attending this evening.